Hi guys, it is Andy here with the BPD Warrior. Over the past 5 years, I have been sharing my story through NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. At least that's how it started, and now I share my story in all sorts of places, and I've shared my pieces of my story online, but I've never gone through the whole thing, and even the stories I do during my presentations through NAMI don't always go into the whole thing. So I wanted to today take a moment and go through my whole story of mental illness. Before I start though, I took a nasty fall down the steps yesterday. I cut up my hand and also I scraped all on my arm, so that's why I have a brace on. There's no self-harm or injury or anything like that, so just wanted to warn you ahead of time. So, my mental health journey. It started when I was 13, but first we need to back up 2 years to about 1996. I am a very geeky person, I'm a very geeky girl, and I taught myself how to make web pages back in 96, with my first page being a Hanson fan page. You guys remember Hanson, right? Yeah, I was in love with Taylor Hanson. Photos everywhere. So anyway, that's where I first learned how to make websites, way before the days of social media. And so skip back to when I was 13, ninth grade. Way too cool to like Hanson, of course. But I had a blog, and back then that term hadn't even been invented. We used the terms online journals or online diaries. And so I initially started using mine to share the same things that all girls talk about. School, clothes, boys, those sort of things. But as the year went on, my posts became darker and they became sadder, and I started suffering from suicidal ideation where I wanted to die, but I didn't have a plan of action to follow through with it, and that's what suicidal ideation is. But instead of being supported on my blog when my ideation started moving to suicidal thoughts, where I was thinking of a plan, instead of getting supported, I was actually cyberbullied, a term that hadn't been invented yet. But 4 girls, first anonymously and then proudly outed themselves as girls who went to my school, many of which who pretended to be my friends, were leaving anonymous messages on my blog saying things like, "You're just making this up for attention. If you were really depressed, you'd kill yourself. And if you killed yourself, no one would care anyway." This was, of course, very degrading to my self-esteem. I had 2 interactions with adults about what was going on. The first was my guidance counselor, and I didn't go to her. My friends went to her because they told her I was self-harming, which was accurate. My real friends, not these girls that were posting about me. My real friends went to her and said I was harming myself, I was cutting myself. So she called me into her office the last 5 minutes of the school day. And I came in and she told me why I was there, and she said, "So are you cutting?" And it was winter and I was scared and I thought I was in trouble. I was 13, I was in 9th grade, I didn't know what to do, so I said no. And she was like, "Okay, you can go get the bus." It was winter, I was wearing long sleeves. If I had rolled my sleeves up, she would have seen I was self-harming. But she never made any attempts to talk to any adults in my life to look out for this. I also talked to a family member, and it sounded like I was going to start getting help, but the topic kind of died out and we never went back to it. So I was very invalidated by these first attempts to get help with my mental health, so I stopped talking about it. I didn't tell anybody what was going on in my head, though I was absolutely miserable. I had a few people I would confide in occasionally, but I couldn't just open up to the world. Unfortunately, I found a way to deal with these problems, but not in a healthy way, and that was substance abuse. It started with a legitimate pain medication prescription that I had gotten after a surgery, and it all kind of snowballed from there. Um, Kept getting more pain medication, and when I realized that was too hard to get access to, I turned to alcohol. And so that's what I did for the next decade. Was I basically self-medicated and didn't tell anyone what I was thinking emotionally because no one believed me. I was even engaged right after college, and my fiance at the time would not allow me to see a psychiatrist because he said if I took any medication that could affect my mental illness, that I'd become a different person, even though he had a family history of mental illness and had seen medication do wonders. He didn't want me taking it. So for a decade, I just squelched that pain with substance abuse until 2010. I finally got to my breaking point, and I attempted suicide for the first time. I almost died. At age 25, I was at one hospital where I had initially been brought, being transferred to another hospital because at age 25, I needed a liver transplant. That's how bad it was. And as they were prepping me for the liver transplant, and as things were going downhill more and more, my mental health just suffered. But by some reason, my liver started to regenerate, like the day before I was supposed to have the liver transplant. And that's something your liver will do. Your liver will rebuild itself when it has time. But because of all of the alcohol and substance abuse I had been through, it didn't seem likely, but mine did, and I ended up not needing that liver transplant. Instead of valuing my life after this attempt, though, I actually got a lot worse. My suicide attempts just skyrocketed. I had multiple more suicide attempts. In 2011, I was in the hospital, give or take 15 different times for suicidal thoughts or suicide attempts. I was doing anything I could to hurt myself. I was self-harming. I was driving dangerously. I was even shoplifting. Just anything that I could do to self-destruct, I kept doing over and over and over again. So I was talking to my therapist about this, and she suggested a name for all these over-the-top symptoms I was having and suggested I might have what's called borderline personality disorder, which is ridiculous because I have a great personality. I do have BPD. I'm not going to go through the whole symptom list like I usually do, but yeah, I very much registered with the symptoms that are on the list. But I didn't want to take that diagnosis. I felt it was an insult. And she was like, you know what? Go get a book on BPD and read it and tell me what you want, what you thought about it, what you relate to. And I'm like, what book? What book should I get? She's like, I don't know. This wasn't my favorite therapist. Thankfully, I got a really good book, which was the Borderline Personality Disorder Survival Manual. Can't remember all of the authors. One of them I know was Matthew McKay. But this is one of the best books on BPD. So I started reading it, and I started highlighting anything that, registered with me. And by the end, and sometimes when I was highlighting with a yellow crayon while laying in my bed in a psychiatric unit because of another suicide attempt or suicidal ideation or suicidal thought. So by the end, I had a yellow book. This book, it just totally described me. I had a yellow book. If I knew where it was, because in the middle of moving, I would show you guys. But yeah, I had a yellow book. So I'd had all these hospitalizations at the same hospital, 15, 20, something like that. And I brought the book, once I'd finished it, to the psychiatrist I kept seeing every time I was in there. And she's like, yeah, yep, I'm comfortable diagnosing you with BPD, and that's, what I was thinking it was, but with you showing me this book and how much you agree, then yes, this is you. And as much as I didn't want to accept that diagnosis, because I felt like it was like a puppy, and if I named it, I had to take it home with me. As much as which is how I initially felt like this, but by the time I talked to this doctor and she actually diagnosed me, it was like, thank you, there's a name for this thing. Excuse the language, but I always thought I was just fucked up. I thought I was just a lost cause. There's no point. Andy is just screwed up. Nothing's gonna fix her. She's a lost cause. And that's how I spent all my life. And then it was like, oh my God, there's actually something wrong with me. I'm not just broken. So they all wanted me to go into DBT, or dialectical behavior therapy, which you'll hear me talk about a lot because it was incredibly successful for me once I was able to get in. So when, at this time, I didn't have any insurance. Thankfully, the hospital I was going through had a program for people who had no income like me, and I didn't have to pay for these hospitalizations. But trying to get me into a DBT program was pretty hard, because the only DBT program in the area was in a county next to the county I lived in, but not the county I lived in, and this was done through the government. So I had social workers, I had therapists, I had psychiatrists, I had so many people call on my behalf and be like, look, we know she lives in X county and you only treat Y county, but please take her, you're her only option. And they were like, nah, county boundaries were just too tight for them at that time. So all of this happened around August, September of 2011. But I was really lucky. They did open actually it was people from that county that I couldn't go to had started their own business. And I began going there when they opened. Their first days open January 3rd of 2012. So I had to go a few months without DBT. I saw a therapist and a psychiatrist through that time, just not anyone that specialized in BPD. So, DBT did a huge amount for me, and I really loved it. I didn't have any insurance at the time, though I was on Social Security disability. So, I was paying 100% of my disability to afford this service, because this is how much it meant to me. DBT is very, very complicated and very intense. So first, every day you have a diary card you have to fill out, which every day you rate and it's specialized to who you are, which you rate your emotions. What was your anger on a scale of 0 to 5? What was your sadness scale to 0 to 5? Did you have any suicidal thoughts? Did you have any suicide attempts? Did you have any substance abuse attempts? Did you have any self-harm attempts? All of that is related specifically to what you're going through. And I jumped both feet into DBT as soon as I got into it. At that point, I was desperate for help. I would have done anything for help. If someone had been like, well, we've decided since we can't get you into DBT, how about we do I think you should see a witch doctor. And I'd be like, cool, what's the witch doctor's name? Can I get their address and what their phone number is? Because I'm going to call them. Because I was desperate for help. I hated that I kept doing this stuff to myself. But I did. I kept doing it over and over and over again, and I needed help. So when I got into DBT, I threw myself into it. My therapist joked about how I was like a walking poster board for DBT, because I jumped all the way in, which is kind of rare for people with BPD. A lot of people with BPD struggle doing DBT because it's a lot of, it's very structured, which for me is what I needed. And it's not, you don't spend a lot of time talking about your past. Like your first session, you kind of get them up to date with what's going on, but then you only talk about what happens each week. So go into my therapist's office. First thing I do is I hand her my diary card. That paper I was working on where I rate all my emotions. I also mark off what skills I've done. I hand this to her and she looks at it and she's going, okay, Tuesday your sadness was at a 5. What happened on Tuesday? And that's how we start. We don't talk about the past much. We talk about how to fix things in the right now. So that's the first part of DBT is the paperwork, with also includes homework. The second part being your individual session. The third part is group therapy. They use the term group therapy, but it's much more like a class than what you expect when you just like think of what you would expect from a group therapy session. There's not a lot of sharing. It's more of a class where you learn a new skill each week. And my first therapist was telling me about DBT and mentioned the group therapy aspect. I was like, oh, hell no, I won't do that. Because I was literally the stereotypical World of Warcraft player, living in my parents' basement, playing WoW 24/7, except for when I was drinking. It was not a good situation, and so I could barely function with cashiers or just, random people be like, hey, and I'd be like, so I have really bad social anxiety, and so I joined, and later my therapist would say that the first few sessions I was shaking like a leaf and I could barely handle it. But by the end of my sessions, I was talking too much because I'm quite a talker. I met one of my best friends in DBT, and she'd be like, Andy, babbling, if I started babbling when I was talking, and I'd be like, oh, okay, time to bring that back. But I met a lot of great people there, and it really helped me come out of my shell. And there's no way I'd be doing this video here, or certainly not going into psychiatric units or talking to police or student nurses about this stuff if I hadn't gone through the group therapy aspect, because I could barely speak to anyone before all of that. So that was a really big part of my recovery. But about 6 months into doing DBT, I started dating a guy who lived 2 hours away. I'd known him for years. We had been friends, but we hadn't dated. And I moved 2 hours away, 2.5 hours away from my group. But I really liked my therapist, and I really liked my group. So every Thursday morning, I would drive 2.5 hours back down to Richmond, spend the day with some friends or my family or whoever, and then I would spend 2.5 hours driving back after my group session back to Northern Virginia, and again, spending 100% of my SSDI on these sessions, and it was worth it. It was worth it. It was hard. It was definitely stressful. There were definitely a few times I didn't make it, but it was very important to me. And I stayed in DBT for about 1.5 years, and I don't do DBT therapy now because I don't feel like I need those skills being taught to me again. Not that I've mastered those skills, but I've learned enough from them that now I know how to go about my daily life and add these skills into it. Am I perfect with my DBT skills? No, not all the time. Do I keep my DBT manual nearby so I can check it out when I need to? Absolutely. But I learned so much from DBT. One way it was described to me was that people who are growing up with BPD, you're growing up fine, they need a trauma. For me, that trauma was, in my mind, the cyberbullying attacks I received. And I stopped emotionally growing up. And while most of the people who grow up already know all of these DBT skills and are okay with functioning in, the real world, I did not know how to do it because I basically was a teenager, and I tell people this all the time. I was a teenager until I was 28, because that's how I acted. I didn't have any basis of how to act like a normal human being, and instead, that's where my intense emotional breakouts came, and the screaming, and the self-harm, and the suicide attempts, and so DBT was like a huge part for me. But I don't do DBT exclusively now. I've gone through a few different CBT or just multi methodical therapists, and I really like the one I see now, and I'm continuing to see her. 2015, though, that's when I finally went and had a quote unquote interview with my quote unquote boss, Jeff Conley at NAMI Central, Virginia. I call him my boss because he hates that. He's not, he just does our schedules. He's not my boss. He just hates it, so I do it out of being, just using him. But I learned so much from doing stuff with NAMI and have been able to reach out further, being able to do stuff through video, through Zoom, through other nonprofits. I've gone to different shows. I've done online videos, even with places like The Mighty. I've written many articles. And all of that is a huge part of my mental health journey. Now, that's my medication reminder. I already took it. Forgot to turn it off. So all of this, the DBT stuff, I stopped going to DBT in 2015, 2014. But I've been seeing a therapist off and on, and I finally found a really good one a few years ago. But that hasn't stopped me from needing hospitalizations. I was hospitalized twice in 2017, and once actually earlier this year. I was having really hard problems, and there's no shame in having to go into the psychiatric unit because, like one of my mentors for In Her Own Voice and for NAMI, who started all this for me, was she would say, it's like sometimes your car needs a bit of fixing, so you bring it to the mechanic and see what's wrong. And that's how I ended up in the psychiatric unit a few times. I was struggling with my medication, things weren't going right. Spent a few days there, got a little bit stabilized, got some medications fixed, got some appointments set up, and that's what it is. It doesn't mean I failed or anything, but it means I am still continuing the process of working on my mental health. So that's basically the story of how I got to where I am now. I know I've forgotten some parts and put in a little more than I expected, but I hope you guys will enjoy this video. I am still trying to figure out how all this editing and stuff works with YouTube and uploading, and I really appreciate your your patience with it. If anyone has any suggestions, please let me know. Anyway, that's a somewhat full story of my struggles with mental illness. Again, my name's Andy. I am with the BPD Warrior. You can look me up on Facebook or here on YouTube. Thank you for seeing my video. Take care, guys.